Hey, Bene. Good morning, my relatives. Hello, this is Mark Charles. Today is Tuesday, June 24th. I'm sitting here with my second cup of coffee, and I'm excited to have a conversation with you about the power and the lack of authority of our nation, the United States of America. This morning, I woke up and I went and took my daughter. She rose for crew. She rose crew, and during the summer they have practice in the mornings, and so I took her to practice this morning, and it was a beautiful morning. I was down by the river. The tide was in. The river looked amazing. I got out and went for a walk along the river. It was very peaceful, very calm. It's about 7:30 in the morning, and I really enjoyed starting my day that way. Because I'm trying to prioritize my sleep, I haven't seen the sunrise along the river in a while, and so it was nice to be along the river again this morning and to be there. And it just really got my mind into a good frame, a good place, where I was able to focus on the beauty of creation and the humbleness of creator, I guess might be the best way to put that. And it got me thinking in contrast of how so often authority and power and leadership is displayed in our nation through power. Leadership is displayed through power and not through authority. And if you've heard me speak before, you know I've spoken about this for a while. I actually have a sermon that I preached for many years on the biblical dynamics of power and authority, and looked at the teachings of Jesus regarding power versus authority. But I started thinking about our world and our political context in that frame this morning, and it was really helpful. I want to share some of that with you as we share a second cup of coffee together. So I invite you to grab a cup of your favorite morning beverage, pull up a chair, and let's have a discussion. Let me see who's on with me this morning. I'm excited to be doing this. I'm traveling this week, so I leave tomorrow with my daughter. We're actually traveling to New Mexico. I have an event there on Saturday, which I'll be there for. So I'm looking forward to that. And then I'll be also spending some time with my family and visiting my parents for several days, so it will be good to be with them too. Steve, Yat E Bene, good morning. Thanks for joining. It's great to have you here. George, Yat E Bene, thanks for joining this morning. George, I'm actually going to be up in the Pacific Northwest in the end of July and early August. I just had a meeting yesterday with someone to begin planning an event just north of Seattle, and so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at the end of my time here today. But it's great to have you on. I'm excited to share with you some of the speaking events I have coming up with all of you in these next few months. But before I begin, let me do like I always do and acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from what now is called Washington, D.C., but is traditionally the land of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the lands where I'm living. I want to thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. I want to just remind myself and all of us that whatever grounds we're walking on here on Turtle Island, there's a history that predates Columbus getting lost at sea. And it's important to acknowledge the stewardship of the lands by the Native nations who have been here for hundreds, some even thousands of years. So my Piscataway relatives, thank you for your stewardship of these lands. As you know, over the weekend, there was some military action by the United States, and we preemptively bombed Iran, targeting some of their nuclear sites. This comes just a few days after Israel bombed Iran. And both of these were preemptive strikes. Iran had not done anything overtly aggressive recently, and both of these strikes were done essentially in the name of peace, as a way to deter Iran from any future actions and as a way to stop their nuclear program. And they were both preemptive strikes. I shared with you an article, and this is actually one of the better articles I found. It was on CNN, so I read it very carefully. But it actually goes into pretty good depth and detail about how Trump not only came to the decision to bomb Iran, but how he went about planning it and even executing the order. And it was interesting to read. I was appreciative of the very detailed account that CNN gave in their story. And so I invite you to read it. It will give you a little more understanding, a little more background into what all went into this bombing and how it was justified and the thinking behind it and so on and so forth. Um, when I heard about the bombing, and I actually heard about it the night it happened, Friday night, I remember seeing a headline about it. And then, of course, I didn't listen to Trump's little speech about it later that evening. I did not want to hear him talk about how great our military is and how great we are as a country. And so I read the headline, got the facts of what we had done, but I did not listen to his little whatever he does to stroke his own ego. And then I learned more about it the next day as more stories came out. And for me, one of the first thoughts I had regarding this bombing was Trump has run largely on a platform of being a peacemaker. And he's promised to bring an end to wars in Ukraine, to bring peace to the Middle East, right? He's run on a platform of peacemaking, which is really striking because he does not carry a very peaceful demeanor about him. He is very angry and very full of retribution and is always looking to get even and keeps a very tight score of who has harmed him and makes sure that he brings harm to them as quickly and as powerfully as possible. And so I've had some doubt in his peacemaking, not only abilities, but in his even desire for peace, because he does not display that in his personal life. And he did several actions during his first term in office where he did not display actions for peace on a global scale either. And so I take his desire for peacemaking with a very large grain of salt. But what struck me the most is it's very difficult to claim you are doing something for the sake of peace when you strike another nation preemptively. And not only does that completely change the narrative of what's happening, but it changes how you're viewed both internally and externally by the globe. So when we preemptively bomb Iran and then claim we did that in the name of peace, it shows that we are not really that concerned about peace. You can't preemptively strike someone, a nation, which is bombing another nation, is literally an act of war, right? That is an act of war. If another nation bombed us, and they're right, if another nation bombed the United States and said they were doing it to deter us from bombing them, we would not take it as a deterrent in that way. That would not be an action of peace. And yet we claim that we bombed Iran in our quest for peace. And this really shows how screwed up and how colonial the thinking, arrogant, the thinking of our nation is, believing that we can initiate an act of war, flying into the borders of another country and dropping bombs preemptively on them, and then claim we are advocates for peace. And those two narratives just absolutely do not go together. And it got me thinking about the dynamics of power and authority. And I've spoken about this before. I'm going to share with you a video that I've done. It's a video of me from many years ago, back in 2017, where I was speaking on what I call the biblical dynamics of power and authority. And I use this both in many sermons as well as in speeches. This is of me at a conference in 2017 talking about power versus authority. And power is defined as having the ability to act, right? So you have muscles, so you can lift things up. You have money, so you can purchase things. You have weapons, so you can fire your weapons, right? You have power, gives you the ability to act. Authority is defined as the right of jurisdiction, or another way you could phrase that is the permission to act. Now, the United States is obsessed with our power, right? It's not just Trump. All of our presidents, our nation is obsessed with our power. We frequently, doesn't matter who's in office, talk about we have built the most mighty military in the history of the world. We frequently talk about the numbers of our military and the expertise of our weapons and of our weapons designers. And right, we talk and gloat and go on and on about our power. Wall Street, on a regular basis, talks about how we have built one of the most sustainable and our long-lasting economic rises in the history of the world. As a nation, we are literally obsessed with our power. And our power gives us the ability to act, right? Most nations listen to us. When we say something, many nations listen to us. Why? Because we've demonstrated our power over and over and over again. When the Iraq War started years ago, right? What did we do the first day of that war? Shock and awe. We bombed the crap out of the nations there. Why? To display, to demonstrate, when you go to war against the United States, this is what we do to you. During his first term in office, Trump dropped the mother of all bombs, the largest non-nuclear weapon that we have on a nation. Because if you want your power to be influential and effective, you have to demonstrate it, right? I can't just tell you how strong I am. You have to see me lift something heavy. I can't just tell you how rich I am if I were rich. You have to see me buy expensive things or live in a nice house or drive a fancy car, right? Power is effective when it's demonstrated. And so as a nation, we demonstrate our power, our military power. We demonstrate our wealth and flaunt our wealth on a regular basis. Why? So when we say something to nations, they will listen to us. So why do most nations listen to us? Because we've demonstrated our power. We are the only nation in the world, the history of the world, to use nuclear weapons against civilians. We've demonstrated that not only do we have nuclear weapons, but we are absolutely not afraid to use them. And that persuades many, many, many people and nations to obey us. We have demonstrated over and over and over not only what power we have, but our absolute reckless willingness to use it. And so, yeah, we have a ton of power. And most presidents from both sides of the aisle, as well as our financial systems and everything else, love to remind the world how powerful we are. You'll almost never hear our politicians and our business leaders talk about authority. Because if power is the ability to act, authority is the right of jurisdiction, the permission to act. And by and large, the United States of America has very little permission to act, very little integrity to act, very little jurisdiction to act. This is demonstrated whenever a land title case comes up before the Supreme Court. They don't go back and say, well, in this year, we signed this treaty and made this agreement with this native nation that gives us the right to be on these lands and to use these lands for these purposes. They don't show that. What do they show? What do they talk about? As recently as 2005, they talked about, no, we have a doctrine of discovery. Natives aren't human. They're merely occupants of this land. Europeans discovered this land. The United States of America won the right of discovery from Great Britain during the Revolutionary War. We purchased the right of discovery from Russia over Alaska. And we use to this day the doctrine of discovery as justification for Europeans' presence, white people's presence on this land, demonstrating, right, when they won a war and purchased it, that the only authority they have to be here is their power. There is no authority. The only right they have to be here is because they have the ability to act. They have weapons and money to defeat anyone who will come against them. That is what gives them the right to be here. So we have no authority. And while frequently it doesn't get said out loud by nations who want to win our favor, most countries know this. They know we rely solely on power and have very little authority, very little integrity for the things that we do and the actions that we take. And so when we go into a nation like Iran, and I'm not saying for a moment that Iran is not a threat. They are a threat. I don't disagree that they're a threat. But when we, the only nation in the world to have used nuclear weapons against civilians, right? When we bombed Japan, we didn't bomb military targets. We bombed cities. We were willing to show the world, Hitler and Japan, Germany and Japan, that we are willing to kill hundreds of thousands of people in a single moment to win this war. We're the only nation in the history of the world to do that. And now we think we can police what other nations are allowed to have nuclear weapons. When you demonstrate you have no restraint, that hardly allows you to be the judge of who is and who is not allowed to have these weapons. We have no integrity. We have no authority. And so this preemptive strike on Iran over the weekend was just another absolute example of the bankruptcy we have regarding integrity and authority. And all we have is our power, which is why we created the narrative that said we bombed Iran because we believe in peace, which is not a true narrative. You cannot commit an act of war and say you're for peace. That's not how it works. But if you go to the White House's webpage, there's a page on the White House. I'm going to share it with you right now. That says President Trump's display of peace through strength. What they are saying, it's tweets and truth social posts. I'm not going to call them truths because that site is hardly about truth. All affirming President Trump as a world leader and as a great leader, and he had to do this, and we're absolutely for peace. And right, it's absolutely a false narrative. You cannot say you are for peace when you preemptively commit an act of war against another nation. That is not advocating for peace. Now, of course, the Democrats, who have a very short memory and forget that they've done many things like this themselves when they were in power, They, of course, protest and scream and moan, oh, we shouldn't have done this. He should have gotten permission from Congress beforehand. And right, this is just what the two sides do. They both do it. Again, we have no integrity as a nation. Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans. They both do this. They both act this way. Even President Obama, the number of drone killings that he committed during his time in office was astronomical. Again, we have no integrity. We are a nation who rules in this world because of our power and our willingness to demonstrate it, and the fact that we have no problem wielding our power and our destruction at a whim. And so, yeah, we need to think through. Sorry, I got distracted. I had to block someone who was making some spammy comments on the chat list, and so I had to block someone a moment. So that distracted me for a second. And so the challenge with this is, right, so what happens now that we say we're for peace, Trump says he's for peace, but he commits an act of war against another nation. Now you need to control the narrative, right? And this is where I'm going to go back to the book I wrote on Southern Truth, right? Chapters 9 and 10, where we talk about Abraham Lincoln being a blatant, unapologetic white supremacist and one of the most genocidal presidents in our nation's history. And we start that chapter, we introduce that chapter with the adage of the victors write the history. And because so often the victor's narrative is counter to what actually happened, right? And there in the book, we propose the understanding of, had Nazi Germany won World War II, how would their historians have recorded the legacy of Hitler? Well, he would be the greatest leader ever. Had they won World War II, how would the Nazi historians have recorded the details of the Holocaust? Well, we have Holocaust deniers today. Imagine if they won the war, right? What Holocaust? There was no Holocaust. When you win the war, you get to write the history. And so you get to create a mythological narrative that props you up as the hero. That's how it works. Which is why, to this day, Abraham Lincoln, who was literally a blatant, unapologetic, and self-proclaimed white supremacist and one of the most genocidal leaders in our nation's history, this is why, to this day, he is still celebrated as one of our greatest presidents, because he won his wars. Not only the Civil War, but the War of Manifest Destinies. He was seeking to ethnically cleanse the northern, central, and southern routes of the Transcontinental Railway. He won those wars, and so the narrative about him got to be established. And we've turned a genocidal leader, a blatant, unapologetic white supremacist, into one of our nation's most beloved heroes. And it's a completely false narrative. And so when our nation preemptively bombs another nation, and yet we want to have the legacy, or we want to have the status of we are a nation for peace, we have to control the narrative, which is exactly what Trump is trying to do. Control the narrative. The victors write the history. And that's not the only time he's doing this. There's another story I want to share with you. It's from the LA Times. And, well, actually, I want to go back and share something beforehand. So if you go back to March of 2025, earlier this year, Trump gave an executive order. I'm going to put this into the chat. And the title of the order was restoring truth and sanity to American history. And in this order, I want to just read some of this for you. I'm gonna put this up on the screen so you can see it, but I'm gonna read some of it for you because this order had some very specific purposes. Section 1, Purpose and Policy. Over the past decade, Americans have witnessed a concerted and widespread effort to rewrite our nation's history, replacing objective facts with a distorted narrative driven by ideology rather than truth. This revisionist movement seeks to undermine the remarkable achievements of the United States by casting its founding principles and historical milestones in negative light. Under this historical revision, our nation's unparalleled legacy of advancing liberty, individual rights, and human happiness is reconstructed as inherently racist, sexist, oppressive, or otherwise irredeemably flawed. Rather than fostering unity and a deeper understanding of our shared past, the widespread effort to rewrite history deepens societal divides and fosters a sense of national shame. Disregarding the purpose, the progress America has made, and the ideals that continue to inspire millions around the globe. The prior administration advanced this coercive ideology. At Independence National Historical Park in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where our nation declared that all men are created equal, the prior administration sponsored training by an organization that advocates dismantling Western foundations and interrogating institutional racism, and pressured National Historical Park rangers that their racial identity should dictate how they convey history to visiting Americans because America is purportedly racist. Once widely respected as a symbol of American excellence and a global icon of cultural achievement, the Smithsonian Institution has in recent years come under the influence of a divisive race-centered ideology. This shift has promoted narratives that portray American and Western values as inherently harmful and oppressive. For example, the Smithsonian Art Museum today features The Shape of Power, stories of race and American sculpture, and an exhibit representing the societies, including the United States, have used race to establish and maintain systems of power, privilege, and disenfranchisement. The exhibit further claims that sculpture has been a powerful tool in promoting scientific racism and promotes the view that race is not a biological reality but a social construct, stating race is a human invention. See, this is what happens when the victors write the history. They create a mythology that the United States, that we'll just go to the Declaration of Independence, which he talks about in this policy, in this executive order, that all men are created equal. Doesn't mention the fact that it says men, not women. And when it was written, men could vote and women couldn't. Men could own property and women couldn't. Doesn't mention the fact that 30 lines later, this same declaration referred to Native Americans as merciless Indian savages. Doesn't acknowledge the fact that when the founders wrote that document, when they said all men are created equal, they literally meant white landowning men and did not include women and did not include people of color. They state that apparently the belief by Trump is that race is a biological difference, which is the argument they use to declare and justify white supremacy, and reject the notion that race is a human construct. And so this nation, designed by and for white landowning men, has been feeling the pressure to acknowledge its past, to acknowledge its history, and to begin to make some corrections to what we've done. And they're seeing that as an absolute threat. And so Trump gave an executive order to correct that. And the order goes on. I want to read section 3, or part 3 of section 4, which says, this is restoring truth in American history. The Secretary of the Interior shall Number 3, take action as appropriate and consistent with applicable law to ensure that all public monuments, memorials, statues, markers, or similar properties within the Department of the Interior's jurisdiction do not contain descriptions, depictions, or other content that inappropriately disparage Americans past or living, including persons living in colonial times, and instead focus on the greatness of the achievements and progress of the American people, or with respect to natural features, the beauty, abundance, and grandeur of the American landscape. Basically, what this thing says is you cannot talk bad about white people. That is what this whole thing is about. You cannot talk bad about white people. Trump would love chapters 9 and 10 of my book, pointing out that Abraham Lincoln was a blatant, unapologetic, self-proclaimed white supremacist and a genocidal leader. One of the worst genocidal leaders we've had as a nation. This is the problem. When you have a nation that only understands power, lacks authority, is based on a doctrine of discovery, based on racism, sexism, and white supremacy. And the victors have been able for hundreds of years to write their own history. When that narrative begins to get corrected, there's absolutely going to be pushback on it. And this isn't just Trump. Our nation, the majority of our nation voted for this man. As a country, we said, over 50% of the voters said, this is who we want leading us. This is not a Trump problem. This is not even a Republican problem. This is a national problem. Remember when Cory Booker wanted to run for president, and in 2016, when he was speaking to a room of white landowning men at the Democratic National Convention, he acknowledged that our foundations refer to natives as savages in the Declaration of Independence. He acknowledged that our foundations don't include women and count Africans as 3/5 of a person. He acknowledged all those problems with our foundations, but then he said to the white landowning men in the room, but these and other parts of our history do not detract from our nation's greatness. He would never say that to a room full of women. He would never say that to a room full of black people. He would never say that to a room full of natives. But he said it because the people who make the decision in the DNC are the white landowning men. And if you want to get elected to president, the office of president in this nation, you have to get very good at telling white landowning men how great they are and how you're willing to ignore their history. That's how you get elected president in this country. You have to reaffirm the myth of American exceptionalism, which is based on the lie of white supremacy. And so our nation, which is incredibly violent, inherently unjust, systemically racist, sexist, and white supremacist, we want the narrative of being peacemakers. And so we preemptively bomb another nation, and then immediately begin writing the narrative that we did this in the name of peace. This is the problem. It's not just Trump. It's not just the Republican Party. Our nation is at odds with the notion of creating a common memory. I bring this up about Trump's executive order because the LA Times ran a story over the weekend that order is now essentially going into effect. And they're putting up QR codes at national parks, inviting people, if they find descriptions and placards disparaging American history, or disparaging white men, I should say, to report it so it can be corrected. In that article, it says those marching orders went into effect late last week, have left Trump opponents and free speech advocates gasping in disbelief, wondering how park employees are supposed to put a sunny spin on monuments acknowledging slavery, Jim Crow laws, and the fight for civil rights. Interesting, they left out anything regarding natives in this story. and how they'll square the story of Japanese Americans shipped off to incarceration camps during World War II, and how all that might somehow display an unmatched record of advancing liberty. Our nation is at war from both sides of the aisle of creating a common memory. White landowning men, both Democrats and Republicans, do not want to acknowledge this history. The Republicans are more explicit about it. They say things out loud a bit more boldly than Democrats do, but they're both working towards the same end. Remember, President Biden went and acknowledged the horrors of the boarding schools and apologized. And then turned that speech into a campaign event and created an environment where the boarding school survivors who were sitting in attendance for the first time hearing a president acknowledge the horrors of what this nation did to them, now finding themselves in an environment where they are now expected to clap and applaud and cheer for the leader representing that injustice and representing that horrific history. That's not how you do it. That's not how you apologize. But that's what the Democrats do. Again, the Republicans are just more explicit and say things out loud. The Democrats are more implicit and do things more behind the scenes. But both sides are absolutely opposed to creating common memory. And this is the dilemma that we saw play out this weekend. We have a nation built on incredibly global, unjust, violent, nationalistic demonstrations and abuses of power. And yet we want to have the reputation of being peacemakers and of standing for justice. And our actions do not match our words. And because to this day our nation is established solely on power and not on authority, we act solely out of our ability to act, our strength to act, and not out of having a right of jurisdiction or the permission to act. We have to create the narrative, which is how both Democrats and Republicans continuously commit acts of war towards other nations, while at the same time declaring we are a nation that values peace. We have a ton of power. We have very little, if any, authority. We have a ton of power. We have no integrity. And because our reputation is based on the adage that the victors write the history, we are opposed to creating common memory. Now, relatives, this is why I am holding my common memory tour, where I'm literally traveling around the country talking about Christian nationalism, creation stories, and corn, and helping people understand how our politics, our faith, and our health have all been damaged because of our nation's colonial history and our ongoing colonial values, because of our reliance solely on power and our lack of authority, because of our reliance on demonstrating our power instead of procuring the right of jurisdiction. It has harmed our politics, our faith, and our health. And we saw that demonstrated this week. I'm flying tomorrow to New Mexico, and on Saturday I'll be speaking in Gallup, New Mexico at a Common Memory Tour event. I don't have the location yet. They're still trying to give me the location where I'm going to be. It's supposed to be from 4 to 6 p.m. in Gallup, New Mexico. In July 13th, I'm going to be in near Chattanooga, Tennessee, in Soddy Daisy, at a place there on Sunday, July 13th, speaking at an event there. And I just confirmed yesterday that I will be in the Pacific Northwest at the end of July and early August. I will be speaking in, I think it's somewhere west of Portland. I will be with Sarah Augustine and her coalition to dismantle the doctrine of discovery. And I'm also setting up another event north of Seattle, just north of Seattle in Shoreline, Washington. And that event is either going to be on Wednesday or Thursday. So the event near Portland or in Oregon is going to be, let me get the date for you. That event is going to be Saturday, August 2nd. And the prior week, so either on July 30th or July 31st, I'm going to be in Shoreline, Washington, just north of Seattle, speaking at an event up there. And if you're in the Pacific Northwest, either in Portland or Seattle or one of the two areas around there, reach out to me and let me know. I would love to schedule at least one more event while I'm out there, maybe even two more events while I'm there. And if you are interested in learning more about my Common Memory Tour and the work that I'm doing, you can find that on my GoFundMe site. And you can both read about what I'm doing and what I'm planning, and you can make a donation to my work to get this tour out and to cover my travel expenses and some modest honorarium for me as I go out and speak in these places. But there is an absolute battle, war against our nation's common memory. And I want to do everything I can, especially while that war is so explicitly geared towards silencing discussion about our nation's history. I want to do everything I can to teach our nation, to help our nation understand what we've done. I'm not doing this to silence people. I'm not doing this to shame people or even to cancel people. I'll end with the quote used by George Erasmus, the quote I love to talk about so much. When he was writing about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, he used the quote that says, where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build community, you have to start by creating a common memory. And that's what I want to do, my relatives. I want to stop the hypocrisy of our nation. I want to train our country that we can have a common memory, acknowledge our past and how we were founded as a nation, work towards conciliation and building right relationships for the very first time, so that we can have something we've never had before as a nation, which is healthy community across racial, gender, sexual orientation lines. We've never had that. That's my vision. So my relatives, thank you for joining me today. Thank you for sitting down for a second cup of coffee. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Follow me on social media. I will be active on my social media this next week while I'm in New Mexico. But walk in beauty, my relatives. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. And go on now.